Hey, what's up? Andrew Kramer here for videocopilot.net, and welcome back to another very exciting tutorial. Today, we're going to be taking a look at an experimental technique to create image-based lighting using Element 3D. So what that means is we're going to be using an environment image like this to generate the lighting and specular highlights for our 3D geometry. So it's pretty cool and definitely looks a lot more realistic. So let's talk about what's happening. So usually with Element 3D, you use an environment reflection map. So you can see the windows have a nice reflectivity. But the geometry, the rest of the geometry that's not reflective, isn't really affected by that environment. But what if we could use an image to create the lighting automatically? Well, that's what this technique is that I'm going to be showing you today, called image-based lighting. So I've got this comp set up. Now, you see this image? I'm going to replace it with a different environment map. So I can just click on any one of these, typical equirectangular environment maps, and it swaps out the image, and the entire comp automatically updates with that image map. So you can see the specular highlights right here. See how that matches our environment, and also the colored lighting that hits the side of the helicopter. If we look at the blurred out background, we can really see the detail. Let me go and replace it again, and we can just choose another one here, and you can see all of the highlights. Everything updates perfectly. We can try out some of these other ones here, and just a really cool technique. What's great about image-based lighting is that it's a 360-degree lighting mechanism. So it's very realistic because it's based on actual lights. And if we get closer in here, see the specular, like the highlights here? That would be these guys right here. You can see that they're much more complex and detailed than just having a couple of lights, because we've got some blue and we've got some orange and some different colors that would be very difficult, if not impossible, to recreate with, simple point lights. So having an actual 360-degree environment map for our speculars really makes this look realistic. And here's a couple of different examples using various environment maps, and really cool results. And notice I only have a single ambient light in my scene. So every time I update the image, I'm not adding lights or doing any extra stuff. Now, the basic idea is we're using 3 copies of the plugin. We're using one copy that is 100% ambient lit. So we have an ambient light set to 100%. So everything is just very flat, and the reflection map is on, so we can see the reflections. Now, the other components are the diffuse lighting. So that's the lighting that's sort of pretty soft, that just creates the light from the world. And then we have the specular lighting, which is the highlights from the bright light sources, and we're combining those together on top of our ambient source to create a really nice composite. All right, let's go and take a look at how to set this up. So what we're going to do is create a new composition, and we'll hit OK, and then we're going to create a new solid, and we'll call this element, and hit OK. Then we'll come over to the effects and presets, type in element, and we'll drop that onto our comp. And then we'll go into the scene setup, and we're going to load a model. So I'm just going to go to the projectile weapons and maybe just load one of these missiles. So this looks pretty good. So we'll hit OK. Now, what we want to do is create a camera. There we go. And then we're going to create a light, and we want the light to be ambient and 100% intensity. So what that will do is flatten the image out. So we just have a render that's perfectly flat. And then we'll come over here to the project, and we have that image environment map. So this is important. We want to bring this into our comp because we're going to load it into Element. So we'll come down here to the render settings, environment, and load the image. So if we happen to have an object that has reflectivity, So in the case of the helicopter, the windows are reflective, but the body is flat. So we definitely want to use the environment map as the reflection map so that any parts that are reflective will reflect. However, to create the diffuse lighting, what we're going to do is take the image light and duplicate it. So we're going to choose Edit, Duplicate, and then we're going to pre-compose it. So we're going to choose Layer, Pre-compose, Control-Shift-C. Leave all attributes. We're going to call this diffuse and hit OK. Then we're going to take the element layer and duplicate it. Control-D. And we're going to call this diffuse lighting. And just hit return to rename. And then I'm going to come up to the scene setup. And we want to adjust the material. In fact, we want to reset it. So if we right click, we could choose reset. And then we'll come down here to some of the options. And we're going to set the diffuse color to black and the reflection amount to 100%. So that way it's going to reflect the environment. So we can see now we have this sort of shiny looking missile. Now, instead of reflecting the image light, I want it to reflect the copy that we renamed diffuse. So it looks pretty much the same. However, what I'm going to do is open up that diffuse and I'm going to make a change to our comp. So we're going to go up to the comp settings and we're going to resize it down as small as it can go. I think it's to 8 by 4 pixels and hit OK. So it's really, really small. But I want to take the image, right click, transform, fit to comp. So I've resized it down to, 4 by 8 pixels, really small. And that's going to actually now be part of the reflection map. So instead of being really crisp and shiny, now it's soft and diffused, which works perfectly for our diffused lighting. So we're going to set the transfer mode to overlay. And so now if we turn the show background on, the background copy, we have some lighting that starts to match our background here. Now, the other thing we need to do is create our specular highlights. So what we're going to do is take that image and duplicate it again. And we'll take that copy and pre-compose it again. So Control-Shift-C, and we'll call this specular. And then I'm going to take element, the original copy, and duplicate it. So we've got 3 copies here. And I want to override the environment with the specular environment map. So just to go over this really quick, we have the original image, we have the diffused image, which is resized down really small, and now we have our specular map. So I'm going to double click on that. And here's what we're going to do to create our specular map. So we're going to go to the comp settings, and we're going to set it down to 64 by 32 pixels and hit OK. And again, we'll transform, fit to comp. So what we want to do here is duplicate the layer, and then we're going to shut that off, and then we'll take the bottom copy and choose Effect, Levels. So what we want to do is crush all of the dark pixels and only leave the highlight pixels because we want to create the specular highlights. So we just bring this over until we can just see the highlight parts. And then we made a copy and we're going to turn that back on. Now this doesn't have any effects and we're going to change the transfer mode to divide. So that's just going to make things stay the correct luminance. And then what we're going to do is create another adjustment layer on top and add a quick fast blur. So if we set this to say 2, we'll create sort of a soft specular highlight. So let's come back to our comp. Now we just created a copy of the element layer. We're going to call this specular. I'm going to shut off the show background. Now we want to do something to this material that's different than the others. So we'll go into the scene setup for the specular. And what we want to do is click on the material and remove anything in the diffuse and normal. We just want to keep the specular. So we're going to set the color to black. And we're also going to turn down the specular amount and turn up the reflection amount to 100. and turn the Fresnel down to 0 so that we just have an entire reflective object here. All right, so now we have just the specular highlights. So we'll hit OK. And we have all of the layers that we need to combine to create this image-based lighting effect. So we're going to set the specular to add. All right, so we have the basic setup here. We can scroll in here, we can zoom in. We can see the specularity, so we can turn that on and off. And we can refine this now. So we can maybe go into the output, multi-pass, turn up the reflection amount. Because remember, now that we're on the specular layer, the reflection is actually the amount. Now, sometimes you might see some discoloration, and that's because of the automatic compression. You can just shut that off by going into sampling and turn off compressed textures. And I should get rid of that. So now we have our specular. So check this out. If we go into our specular map, we can lock it and then look at it. So if we turn the blurriness down to 0, it's going to be much more sharp. But if we turn this amount up, it's going to start getting a little bit diffused. So depending on what your object is, you can play around with those settings. But you can also play around with your levels adjustment. So depending on the image, you might tweak that a little bit to make certain things highlight and other things not highlight. But this is looking pretty good. Now, a couple other things that you can tweak. You can adjust the light ambient color. So if we bring it down, it'll bring the overall brightness of the image down. We can also click on the diffuse lighting and turn the reflection amount up. And that'll sort of brighten up the intensity of the lighting. So just try to neutralize your scene a little bit. And then check this out. Once you set it up, we can come over here to the image and replace it. And there we go. We've got an image that's updated. I'll turn our blur back on here. This kind of metal seems like it's more of a diffused metal. And again, we can replace it here. And automatically we've updated the entire image lighting. So it's a very cool thing. So here we've got this nice sunset missile attack. Very nice. Now keep in mind, if you change the model for one of the instances, you want to make sure you update it for each of them since it's using 3 separate copies. And also, if you do any animation, you want to make sure to link the parameters with some expressions and so that all the different copies are linked together. All right, well, I hope you guys found this technique interesting and hopefully you can play with it a little bit. My name is Andrew Kramer. Thanks for watching and we'll see you next time.